welcome everyone. My name is Dovi Frances, the founding partner of Group 11, and I'm excited to welcome you to part one of our 6-part series, Digitizing the Office of the CFO. We decided to launch this webinar to help create a forum where finance leaders and professionals can learn about the tools and strategies that best enable businesses to thrive in what seems to be quite a challenging macro environment. As the world becomes far more unpredictable, finance leaders are faced with a spectrum of challenges stemming from this chaos. We believe that many of our portfolio companies featured in this webinar series offer important tools that can improve the odds of success for businesses of all sizes. On that note, I'm more than happy to welcome here today Thomas Tuchscherer, a seasoned finance executive and the current CFO of TripActions. Prior to TripActions, Thomas was the CFO of Snowflake and Talent, in which he led a successful IPO on the Nasdaq. For our listeners, feel free to ask any question that comes to mind. Use the chat box and we'll try to address those questions at the end of the conversation. For more context on this topic, namely on digitizing the family and the office of the CFO and the coming era of chaos, you can read our articles on my Medium page and on the insight section of Group 11's website. Thomas, it's great to have you. Let's jump into it.
All
right, so let's start with your personal background. You spent time in Canada as an undergrad. You spent time in business school and later in banking in Paris. You started your career in India and you worked in the UK before settling down in the US. Can you take us through your journey and how your worldview has transformed, has changed based on those experiences? And how you decision-making day to day?
Yeah, no, sure. So, I mean, I personally place a lot of value, I think, on international experience, especially when we recruit and look at employees at companies that I've worked at. I mean, I've worked in, to your point, I've worked in Montreal, in Paris, in London, in New Delhi, in Boston, in San Francisco. So, in very different cities and countries around the world, right? And I think what it brings you a sensitivity to different cultures. And as you're building a global, as we're all looking to build global companies, it's very important to have that sensitivity of different cultures and different, people that you're ultimately going to be working with as you're building and scaling out. I think it also gives you a broader mindset, right, in terms of how you look at problems and how to solve problems. It gives you perhaps a different perspective that you didn't have before, right? So again, I think that's very relevant. And I think the most important one for me is somebody that's lived across very different cultural environments, has been able to adapt, right, to the change of those environments. And I think as you're growing and working in a company that's scaling up quickly, one of the constant that you typically is change, right? So if you have somebody that through their international experience has been able to constantly adapt to that change, to their new environment, to different cultures, they've shown that they can adapt to that change, and therefore they'll be more naturally inclined, right, to grow and scale a company that's forever changing, right? So those I think are sort of some of the value set that I think are very relevant, due to an international experience.
Hey, I have a question. Can you give us like one example, like one story from your career where your international experience kind of like played an important role in adapting to a situation that is kind of like evolving rapidly, let's say?
Yeah, I think it's, to me, the one of the experiences that I typically see a lot is, and it's the reverse of my career, right? I've worked with, for example, at Talent, it was a company that was, started in Europe and then grew in the US. So we've addressed the complexities of the European market first in terms of different tax treatments in different countries and different languages, different legislation, different cultures, and then going to a relatively uniform market that the US market is. And what I've seen a lot is American companies or US companies expand into Europe, and a lot of the time they fail, right? Or they're not successful in their first trial because they try to, and they're coming from a very or relatively uniform market. They first expand in the UK, which is, common language. And then they look at expanding in Europe, from the UK, and then it starts to fall apart. And I think where I've been able to help is understand the different sensitivities of culture and the different complexities, that arise and, and exist in the different market, whether it's labor laws, whether it's, cultural sensitivities, whether it's translating, US compensation to European compensation, and how that's not a one-to-one, right, translation. So I would say these types of, experiences have, I think, been useful, right, for, for example, when I was at Snowflake and we're looking at expanding in Europe, as well as at TripActions when we're obviously looking at our European expansion.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about your experience with talent and Snowflake. What do you think in your prior CFO roles? What has prepared you for your experience with TripActions? What type of experiences or lessons you've learned while working at those companies?
Yeah, so there were two very different companies. I mean, and obviously they were in very different industries or market than TripActions today, right? Talent is in the data integration, data management market, which was close to, it's something that you need when you build a data warehouse such as Snowflake. But what talent, brought me as, I think, as a skill set was being able to scale a company and take a company public, right? So it brought the rigor of and the discipline in terms of how to plan, how to be predictable, how to make sure that you have the right controls right on over your financials, how you work with the rest of the management team in terms of ensuring that they're all aware that that predictability is becoming very important. So talent brought a lot of that experience, as well as that deep European international experience that I mentioned previously, right? Again, because it was a European company deploying and growing into the US. And I do believe that, for what it's worth, that for any tech company, in order to be a global leader, you have to become a leader in the US market, right? You can't stay either in Europe or in Asia Pac, or you have to be successful in the US market. So it's a forced passage that I think every successful global tech company needs to go through. At Snowflake, I think it was, the difference of Snowflake was the hyper growth nature of it, right? So, I thought at Talent we were growing fast, but Snowflake was on a completely different scale, right? In terms of how quickly the company was growing. So that brought a lot of experience in terms of when you're scaling a company that's growing so quickly, it's ensuring that all functions grow at about the same rate. So for example, if you're investing a lot in your sales team and your sales capacity, but you're not keeping that same investment in your legal team, for example, right? It starts creating friction if not all the teams are growing at the same scale, right? So it's trying to be that coordinator or that orchestrator where you're investing across the different functions at relatively similar paces. And I think the other thing that Snowflake brought was a consumption model, right? So Snowflake was one of the, you could argue the first companies were the cloud platforms such as AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, but Snowflake was 100% consumption model, right? So again, the company recognized revenue on processing as well as storage that its customers used. And again, TripActions is very similar. We follow consumption model. We earn revenue when our customers travel, right? So again, it follows that type of consumption model. So I think those are the skills that were helpful to me at TripActions. Right? At Talent, it was more the IPO and the European nature, while at Snowflake was the hyper growth and the consumption model.
So let's talk about that for a second. I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Snowflake was the fastest growing software company in the Americas, slightly before COVID, right? It was growing at a rapid pace. In fact, if you look at multiples today, it's obviously a publicly traded company, but if you look at the enterprise value for the next 12 months, it's still the highest out there in terms of that. It gets a huge premium because it grows so fast, right? So I'm thinking about Snowflake and your transition to TripActions. And it kind of begs the question, who leaves a rocket ship towards something that is relatively unknown when you joined in December of 2019, and why?
Yeah. So in terms of I think in terms, and I don't think it's a big secret, right? In terms of, the transition from Snowflake to TripActions, at Snowflake, we went through a management leadership, leadership change and a management change. And Frank Slootman came in as a new CEO, and Frank's been working with with the same team from his data domain days to his ServiceNow days. So he came in with his head of finance, with his CFO, Mark Scarpelli, with his head of legal, with his head of HR as well. And that sort of led to, my transition to other companies such as TripActions. So that was, I think, when I left Snowflake, I think one of the questions that came up is, what would be the next adventure? And I had a lot of interviews and discussions with different companies, and I stopped all discussions, right, with everyone, because I didn't, it's a bit like you're breaking up a relationship, and you don't want to take a wrong decision because you're too emotional. The break point is happened too early. So I stopped all of my discussions with all with all sort of portfolio companies that VCs had introduced me to, except one, which was TripActions. And I spent a lot of time with Ariel and some of the board members, and it led me to TripActions.
Beautiful. So when was that aha moment? Was it love in first sight, or did it take you a few more meetings with Ariel to kind of like fall in love with the vision of the company, and have kind of like a significant vote of confidence in Ariel's ability to execute? Because you joined December of 2019. It was right before or right at the closing of the financing round. It was $154 million financing round led by Andreessen, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think the Andreessen round was in 2019 at that that $4.5 billion valuation. But what I think for me, what led me and what piqued my curiosity, right, with TripActions was, one, it was a completely different industry than what I was used to, right? It was, so all of my past companies that I've worked at were in in enterprise, I would say enterprise technology, sort of the enterprise technology stack, whether it was business intelligence, whether it was data warehousing, whether it was data management, or analytical applications, right? It was always around, I want to say, the enterprise app sort of infrastructure. And obviously working business travel was something new, right? So, and it was something that I became familiar with because at Snowflake, right, we actually rolled out TripActions at the company. So, so I was very familiar, with the different travel solutions that existed in the industry, right? At Talent, we were using Amex and Concur, right? In terms of, and then we switched out to different types of travel agencies, but still using Concur. So I knew all of the issues and the challenges, right, that existed with the incumbents in terms of solutions. So I would say that the thing that really drove me to TripActions, number one, was like believing in the product and believing in the product capability and the platform, and understanding that you can build a company out of that product. It's not a feature, but a full platform. And at the time, in December 2019, Ariel was talking to me about Liquid, which is our corporate card and expense management solution, that extended the the travel experience. So so that really sort of appealed and talked to me. And then I think the other part was the potential of the company, right? In terms of, and there was a lot of parallels that you could draw, I think, between TripActions and Snowflake, right? So in terms of, from a potential perspective, one is the market size. You talk about huge markets, right? The data warehousing market that, Snowflake was addressing was massive, right? In terms of, and today the data cloud market, right, is huge. On the TripActions side, right, the business travel market, as well as the expense management and the cards, is huge as well, right? I mean, in terms of, so you're talking about huge markets. So leaving a lot of room to grow and to scale and to continue to grow a company for a long time. Second part were the incumbents, right? In terms of, at Snowflake, they were competing with companies such as Teradata, right, which had been created in in the 80s, right, and 90s, right. So very, you had incumbent that were relatively old. For TripActions, we're competing with travel agencies, which are mainly offline world, right? So the Amex GBT, the Carlson Wagonlit, the BCD, so they're essentially call centers. So again, the competitive dynamics were super favorable. And then I think the third ingredient from a potential perspective that I found super appealing at TripActions and that you saw at Snowflake, was that users loved the product. They were very passionate about the product, and they were vocal about it, right? And that helps you from in terms of a voice of having employees that leave a company that would be using TripActions go to one that doesn't use TripActions, and then being vocal about, hey, we should be using TripActions because it's such a better user experience. So having that passion about the love of the product and the usage of it, to me, sort of talked about the potential of the company as well, right? So huge market, low competitive dynamics, and a product that users love. I think you had those in both Snowflake and TripActions.
I'm just wondering, before I move to the next question, how much of the decision was rooted in intuition? And again, intuition is a complicated term because intuition is rooted in repetition, right? And past experiences. And how much of it was really like cold, hard analysis of, okay, what's the total addressable market, sellable addressable market, market dynamics, incumbents versus insurgents? Like for real, how much was it like you felt it the moment you stepped into the office, and how much was like, okay, I need to do some homework before I come to a conclusion?
Yeah. There's one point that I didn't talk about in terms of, and I think it's related to perhaps what you call intuition, Dovi, is the people component, right? In terms of, because you can work and decide to work for a company with a lot of potential, but if the people there are not people that you enjoy spending time with, right, it's not worth it from my perspective, right? In terms of, again, the company may have a lot of potential, but if you're miserable in the office because the people there are not people that you enjoy spending your time with, it's just not worth it. So I think that comes into play from an intuition perspective, because it's hard to scientifically sort of come up with an algorithm that's going to tell you, hey, this is somebody that I want to work with or not, right? So so I think I would tie the intuition component to the people dynamics, right? And to having a team that you want to work with, right? So and I think that's where intuition comes in. Hey, do I see myself working with this person? And one of the tests of questions that I ask myself is, hey, if I'm stuck in a plane in a transcontinental flight, so take, for example, Tel Aviv to San Francisco, right, for 11 hours or 12 hours, do I want to sit next to this person for 11 hours, next to the CEO, for 11 hours? To me, that's a true test. And if the answer is no, then maybe it's, you're not going to have that chemistry that's so important, right, for you to be successful, and it's not going to be the person that you're going to want to enjoy spending time with, right? So,
great. All right. So you make the transition from Snowflake to TripActions. Perfect. What seems to be like a perfect timing, right? Just the big financing round closed, the company's on a tear, revenue are accelerating, and it's really rapid pace. Actually, second probably only to Snowflake at that time in terms of kind of like what was happening in Silicon Valley. So the second fastest growing company in Silicon Valley at that time. And all of a sudden, a force majeure event takes place. March comes about, travel shuts down almost globally and almost immediately, right? Within a couple of months. Okay, you have a wife at home, you have 3 kids, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Pretty significant career transition. And what do you say to yourself, and how do you manage your psychology having a company that was on a tear, revenue going to zero? The business that was impacted the most at that time were travel companies, right? Look at the stock of airlines and other travel-related companies. Like how do you manage with?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. One of the analogies that I used to sort of frame the context of what was happening, right, is imagine you're sort of in this sports car, right? And you're driving as fast as you can. You've got your foot on the accelerator and you're hitting the red line on the sort of odometer, right? In terms of, and you can't go faster because the car just doesn't go faster. And that's, I want to say to some extent, was TripActions pre-COVID, right? We were growing like 5x year over year. So we couldn't recruit faster. It was just, we just couldn't grow as fast. And we were on the red line all the time in terms of growing. And to your point, in the space of 3 weeks, like in 3 weeks, you lose 95% plus of all of your revenue, right? So it's as if you're driving that sports car as fast as you can, off a cliff, right? And of course, cars aren't meant to fly, right? So so the challenge, right, is how do you land the car, right? And how do you land the car without crashing it too much, and in a way that's as smooth as possible, so that it can continue to drive afterwards, right? So and that's what we were faced with, right? In terms of so a lot of it was all about developing, because at the time there was no playbook for a global pandemic, right? And to your point, I think the two industries that were the most impacted was business travel and maybe the cruise line industry, right? So and the only thing you could do, because you know we would try to seek advice from people, but no one knew, right? There was no expert that could tell you in terms of, hey, this is how long COVID's going to last. No one knew. And the only thing you could do is do a whole bunch of scenarios, right? So we did a lot of scenario planning in terms of, hey, what happens if this happens, right? What happens if if our revenues stay at zero for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 24 months, right? What happens if we try to continue to win new customers during the pandemic and we continue to invest in sales and marketing? How much cash do we want or do we need, right? And so we did so many scenarios to make sure that we would be able to land the car and that it would continue to drive. So I think that's, and it consumed us so much from a timing perspective, and we had to take decisions so quickly that for me, it never occurred to me, right, in terms of that, hey, this isn't the company that I signed up for, right? Or this isn't the company that I was joining, right? It was, I think it created also such a bond internally with the team and the leadership team across the company in terms of how to solve this, how to come up with a solution, that we worked as a team in order to get out of it and to come and find solutions. So I think that's, for me, that's, to some extent that was the silver lining of it, is that it really sort of forced us to work better together, and to work together to find solutions so that we could, again, land that car as smoothly as possible and then continue in our journey, right? So
yeah, and also you made it, as a company, a C-suite, you made a few unpopular decisions at that time, right? I mean, TripActions was the first to lay off employees. You remember via a Zoom call in April, I think it was, or May, where the company was extremely criticized for doing things this way, although there was no other option, right? You couldn't meet them in person. And obviously, I think that about 30% of staff were laid off, and I think that unpopular decision actually, in hindsight, saved the company or set it up on a healthy trajectory going forward. And by the way, many companies followed us later on. Another thing that I remember, I used to speak with Ariel almost every night when COVID started. In fact, when COVID was about to start and we started reading the news coming out of China, I remember going into TripActions' last face-to-face all-hands meeting. I had like hundreds of people in the room, right, in the offices in Palo Alto. And before Ariel took stage, I spent some time with him and I said, hey, Ariel, are you going to say something about COVID? He's like, well, why would I say anything about COVID if I'm not sure it's even coming to the Americas? And lo and behold, a few days later, they shut everything down. So nobody really knew. I think it was also interesting to see how the product has evolved during that time where people were not traveling, right? Ariel was talking a lot about duty of care. Like, how can we help our customers basically transition from, between territories if they need to travel for business or what have you? And how do we give them guidance as to kind of like the risks associated with their travel, their ability to come back home, or how do we help them to come back home if a certain territory is just closed? So it was very interesting to see how the product has evolved over time as well.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think, and that's the advantage, right? If you look at TripActions as a platform relative to what exists in the market, we essentially rebuilt what I call the whole travel technology stack, right? In terms of from how we connect to suppliers, the airlines, the car rental companies, the hotel companies, to how we present that to travelers in terms of how you book your trip and the user interface, the user experience in terms of how that, how those suppliers are presented to the travelers. And because we own the full stack, right, end to end, as opposed to your travel agency, which connects to like a Sabre or an Amadeus GDS, and then uses a Concur as as an online booking tool. Because we weren't that, and we own the full stack, there was so much more information that we could provide, right, to travelers, to your point, in terms of, hey, what's the reproduction factor of COVID in Seattle versus New York versus Boston versus Paris, right? So which routes are safer, right? Is San Francisco, Paris, is that a safe route? So we came up with scores in terms of how to rank routes, right? And all of this we could do, right, because we own the full end-to-end experience in terms of the technology travel stack. For example, if you were Amex and you want to include third-party data on the Concur booking tool, you can't, because Concur is part of SAP, right? So you don't have control over their product roadmap in terms of how they're developing that online booking tool. So again, because we owned everything end to end and we had the engineers and the resources, we could do so much more in terms of information for our travelers to improve that duty of care and to improve the safety and health features, right, that our travelers wanted at that time. Because some companies did continue to travel, not many, but some did.
Got it. All right. Let's do this. Let's stay on TripActions for a second, and I have a couple of questions about your career and kind of like the choice to become a CFO, but we'll touch it in a few minutes. I want to stay on TripActions for a second because COVID ended, and on the back end of COVID, the companies raised significant sums of capital through a few financing rounds, some of which were not yet announced, and we'll talk about that in a few days, I hope. And the company is expanding now globally, right? So there was the acquisition of Reed & Mackay in the UK, there was Comtravel, there was Resia, and the company is kind of like becoming a global operation at a fairly large scale with thousands of employees, etc. How do you manage that as CFO? How do you manage that as a professional? And also talk about the dynamic between you and the C-suite now that people are kind of like positioned in different territories.
Yeah. So I think when you have it goes to what we were talking, I think, at the beginning. If you already have an international experience, it helps you scale. It helps you move faster in terms of how you scale companies, internationally or outside of the US. And you already have a network of service providers. You already understand in terms of the some of the complexities of the local markets. You already have people that you've worked with that may be in those markets, right? So I think those are all very important pluses, right, in terms of when you're joining and you're working in a company that's scaling globally. And to me, I would look, again, and when we hire people, we look, especially in leadership, we look for people that have that international experience because of that. And the other thing I think that's important, especially as you're scaling globally and things are becoming more complex, is making sure that you have a team around you that you can count on, right? In terms of, if I look at my team, right, in terms of, I have people that followed me from Talent to Snowflake to TripActions, right? So, because we've gotten to know each other super well, we trust each other, we've scaled companies, and it reduces the risk, right, as well. It hasn't happened for all positions, obviously, but for a few core positions, I think it helps to bring people that you've worked with in the past that are capable of scaling and their skill set. So I would say that that helps as well, right? Is having a network of people that are willing to follow you, right? I think is also a testament to to a decent manager and somebody that has a certain set of leadership skills, right?
All right. Let's talk about the market right now and where we are, which I think is fairly unique, right? We couldn't have predicted the second bounce of the ball following COVID and what happened in 2021. Pure insanity in terms of valuation and the cost of inflation rising, so CPI rising pretty significantly. But we're still running at 8.3% annual inflation, which is extremely high. The Fed is doing everything in their power to basically apply pressure on the economy to slow down. Okay, that might yield a mild recession over the next 6 to 12 months. At least that's what analysts predict. So when you think about that, I would like you to think take off the head of TripActions CFO and let's just talk about you as a CFO, okay? And there are many other CFOs that are tuning into us, many other founders who care a lot about the bottom line. There are significant pressures on expenses rising, right, and revenue declining at certain companies as well. And finance professionals and entrepreneurs need to balance this thing right now in a pretty uncertain environment, and things might get worse before they get better over the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months. So thinking about kind of like your experience as an extremely seasoned CFO, what would be the advice that you would give them, generally speaking, right, in terms of using technology that can help their bottom line, and also in particular in a kind of like a self-serving fashion, would you recommend use TripActions and why?
Yeah. So I think it goes back, to some of the things that I was saying earlier in terms of, to your point right now, we've got inflation that's going up. The Fed or various central banks are, obviously increasing rates, which may or may not provoke a recession, right? So there's a lot more uncertainty than before, right? And I think the hard thing with uncertainty is that you need to be able to change and act quickly, right? In terms of, because back to, the pandemic days that what we were going through, I think one of the challenges we didn't know what was going to happen in the future. So there was that huge amount of uncertainty. So I think the key thing is making sure that you have information quickly and that you can act quickly, right? So, and that you can change quickly. And in order to be able to change quickly, right, I think you need to have, again, access to information super fast. And then the other thing is you've got to be able to execute change across a company very quickly, right? So, and by executing change, I mean, it's changing a process, fine-tuning your T&E policy, or fine-tuning or finding some sort of policy in order to react to that change, because you need to, for example, save costs, right? Because you're going to miss your top line because recession is starting to hit your business. So, and again, if I speak about TripActions, right, what the company does, right, is it gives you information in real time, right, about your T&E spend, right? So all the time, at any point in time, how much globally and company-wide your company is spending on T&E, and where exactly it's being spent, how much is being spent on airline, on hotels, on internal trips versus customer-facing trips, right? So it gives you that access and that visibility to information at a very very high level of granularity. And then the other advantage that it brings you goes back to the second point, is being able to execute change, right, across the company, because it's a global platform and it works not only in the US, but it works globally across many countries. And because it's so easy to use, you can change your T&E policy and have that done dynamically and almost in real time, right? So you want to say, hey, right now, the only population that I want to travel is my revenue-facing teams, right? So it's my sales team. Everyone else, I want that to freeze, right? And maybe you make an exception for your executive team, or maybe then you make an exception to, I'm making this up, to your UK-based customer success team, because there's a very large UK customer that needs to be managed and handled with. And again, with TripActions, you can have that fine level of granularity of being able to execute that change company-wide or department-specific or region-specific very quickly, right? Because again, it's so easy to use. If you were using Excel to manage your travel, good luck trying to change your T&E program, right, globally, or even across many employees across the US, right? If you were using Concur or your travel agencies, I mean, again, very hard to implement change quickly, right? Because you need to bring in a consultant, which will sort of work on your Concur deployment in order to change your T&E policy, right? So again, the capability to execute change quickly, I would say, in the existing platforms today isn't there, right? So it will take you time. And again, if there is a lot of uncertainty that requires you to act quickly, I don't think you get there with solutions that exist in the market, right? So, and again, because we at TripActions, we rebuilt the whole sort of travel tech stack. And because we're a travel agency and we're also, in a single stack, we're also the technology layer, the booking tool, the reporting layer. Because we rebuilt all of that, we provide that information quickly and that capability to execute change very quickly.
I have a question on that. And again, what I've noticed, and we interact with many, let's say, CFOs and in general professionals in the tech community and otherwise, is that the audience has changed, right? So there's been, and we talk about it, by the way, if anyone wants to read The Coming Era of Chaos, we talk about it. You can find it on my Medium page, you can find it on our website. But in The Coming Era of Chaos, we're talking about three kind of like fundamental forces that have converged together to create the kind of like this situation where automation is at a tipping point, right? Where technologies like TripActions have become a must. One of them is that the economy stopped growing. You can see that definitely in Europe. You can see a significant slowdown in the Americas and other territories. The second one is we call it the era of entropy. Basically, the environment has changed in a fashion that it causes a lot of abnormalities, COVID being one of them, right? COVID is not a cause, COVID is an effect, and it's an effect of global warming. And the third thing is that the workforce has changed, and I want to focus on that note. By 2025, 75% of the workforce will be people who were born after 1980. They're also sitting at the office of the CFO. They're also probably a significant part of our audience now, because more than 50% of the workforce is now people who were born after 1980. Those people, being digital natives, are far more inclined to adopt technologies that are revolutionary, like TripActions. Do you notice that with the CFOs and the C-suite level people that you guys interact with?
Yeah. So, I mean, I interact with obviously with a lot of peers, a lot of my peers across across Europe and in the US, and peers, I mean, like finance leaders. And I think it's funny, but I think in certain, you're right. I mean, I think there's an expectation that we should automate, that tools should be easier to use, that what you see on the consumer side in terms of consumer grade user experience, we should see on the business applications as well. But the funny thing is that I think for travel specifically and for T&E, there's been so little innovation in terms of for so long, again, on the business travel side, that I can tell you a lot of finance folks, and again, I'm not talking about the business traveler, but I'm talking about the finance users, sort of had given up on finding a modern solution, that would give them the information that they needed, that would automate certain processes that they would have to do manually. And they had given up because there was nothing out there, right? In terms of, and because to some extent, again, Concur had existed for so long and had such a large market share, and no one had, come up with a better alternative. So I think TripActions, we are that platform that can bring that sort of next gen user experience, and we are also that platform that automates a lot of things that were manual previously, in terms of reconciliation, in terms of approvals, in terms of compliance and checking expense reports, right? So a lot of these things we automate, and again, things that weren't thought feasible before, because no one had thought that these things could be done, right? And because you had given up on that. Again, other finance leaders had given up on trying to find a solution that did that. And so for us, I think it's creating the awareness that there is an alternative that actually does and automate and has this next gen user experience that millennials or this new type of employee is looking for, and it's ensuring that awareness, right, exists in the market. And I think that speaks as well to the size of the market that we're addressing. Today, again, the company's growing very fast, but we're still only capturing, I want to say a drop in terms of a drop in the bucket of how big this market is, right? And it's creating the awareness that there's a better solution that exists that provides such a better user experience also for the finance teams, that automates and saves so much time, again, for those finance teams. In terms of reconciliation automation, in terms of compliance, in terms of in terms of reporting, that that there is hope, right? And we're coming. So
yeah, you know what's really interesting is that I started my career in the Americas after business school. I went to Deutsche Bank and I joined June of 08. Speaking of timing, by the way, Thomas, there was nothing left afterwards, but managed to keep my job. But never mind, that's for a different conversation. But at that time we were using Concur. And it was, it used to take hours just to book travel. And then, of course, we're talking about expense reimbursement. You go to New York for a business trip and you're using the American Express card, you need to keep the receipt. And if you don't keep the receipt, you need to pay for your paycheck. It was just an awful experience. But as a young professional back then, not a finance executive, not somebody in the decision-making juncture at Deutsche Bank, somebody who was one of the users, right? One of the employees. I took it for granted there is no other solution in sight, and I did what needed to be done, right? I mean, I just filed the expense report. Then I went back to my manager to acknowledge some of those expenditures, and I struggled through trying to book and change flights. And my point earlier about the generational change is that not just the finance executives have changed, right? Back in the days, I mean, the head of travel in Deutsche Bank is now retired. He's probably 70-something, right? They're baby boomers. The employees have changed as well. So you have kind of like this interesting parity, right, between the office of the CFO or the office of the CHRO, depends on the organization who makes the decision, and where there are younger people that are, let's say, technology forward facing, let's say, technology forward leaning. And then you have the employees that almost demand the type of solution because they're just used to doing things in a mobile fashion, in a prompt fashion, and in an efficient fashion. So I think we're at a very interesting nexus at an industry that is probably, I think, and again, we've underwritten many industries, right? Because we have invested in quite a few category-defining companies. There isn't any larger industry than the corporate travel and expense management industry, right? And if you put it together, just corporate travel globally is $1.5 trillion. US is 900 billion of that. Right, but if you start adding the digital card expenditures and expense management and what have you, it becomes a multi-trillion-dollar market. So we're definitely, I think, at the helm of being the most innovating, cutting-edge company out there. And on that note, let's think about the future for a second, okay? Barring no force majeure events, okay? Assume no nuclear conflicts with other countries and what have you. You've been at work since 96, Thomas, or 94, your career?
Yeah, I'd say mid-90s, honestly.
A couple of decades, yeah. I think you've been charging hard for a few decades now. This, and again, I'm choosing my words carefully, right? But you're kind of like at the top of your career, the pinnacle of your career. The company, based on foreign sources, is filing or has filed to go public. Continuing on a massive growth trajectory, perfect product market fit, perfect alignment with the market, perfect alignment with the time in the market where CFOs are trying to reduce expenditures in order to increase gross margins in the face of an economy that stopped growing and a workforce that has changed. And I want to take you like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where do you see yourself and where do you see the company and how the two of them jive together?
Yeah, I think for, I sort of view my, my specialty, right, is, or I think perhaps what I'm known for is enabling growth, right? So at all the companies that I've worked at, it's always been in terms of how do you enable growth or how do you accelerate growth, and obviously in a way that makes sense financially, and so I think with and again, this is going to sound maybe very simplistic, but for us, right, I think we're at the beginning of our journey. I mean, and again, the company's been founded for now 6 or 7 years, but I think in terms of the potential that's in front of us, we believe that there's this massive market that you mentioned before, Dovi, right, that we want to take and that we want to gain. And that gives us, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right, of runway in terms of being able to continue to grow and build this very, very, very large, independent, successful company that's a leader in its domain, right? And that's where, that's what we want to do. That's what the team here, I think, at TripActions wants to do. And I think our ambitions are going to go obviously focus on business travels and the frequent traveler and the services that we can provide to that frequent traveler. We're both on the leisure side as well as obviously on the business side. So I think our ambitions are very large. I think we've got we've shown the success in the execution so far. We've survived, I want to say, a once in a century event, and we've come out of it stronger. And we're going to continue to invest, and I think to grow and scale the company, in the next 5 to 10 years, right, and beyond. And I think we've got we've got the market, we've got the platform, we've got the ambition, we've got the funding, we've got the means, right, to do that. And I think that's what we plan to continue to do, right?
Great, excellent. So let's do this, Thomas. There are a few questions from the audience. Maybe we'll try to address them in a couple of minutes that we have remaining. Let's start with answering Islam from video. Okay, he's a manager at video. And I'll try to read the question. It's a bit long. I'll try to read it and be as accurate as I can. Okay? So I'm quoting Thomas. On the one hand, you're talking about quickly adapting to the surrounding reality. And on the other hand, you're talking about the ability to manage and follow up on an ongoing basis. But usually, a travel budget in large companies is something that is prepared in advance, usually at the beginning of the year. And budgets are divided between the managers and the various departments, which makes it more difficult for you to transfer various updates and reductions when you have many managers in different departments and locations. How is TripActions product adapting to these type of challenges in large companies?
Yeah. So typically, I think every company goes through a budget cycle at the end of a year for the next year and sets out what they think will be the T&E spend by function, by team, by geo, right? So for sure. But nothing, at least, most companies, and especially in an environment that's changing, things don't stay static, right? And I think most companies then do reforecasts on a regular basis. And when I was talking about scenario planning, that's what I meant was these reforecasts. And doing different types of forecasts based on different types of assumptions. So there, it's getting the information so that you can do these reforecast, and then it's being able to, as I was mentioning, executing that change, right? So across the company. So with TripActions, right, you can decide to, hey, I want to kill the budget, the T&E budget or the travel budget, for example, and again, I'll use a broad scale of the G&A function. And I want to keep, again, only my sales team traveling, right? So again, these are super broad strokes, but you can do that and you can execute that change globally very quickly through, again, what we call that dynamic T&E policy at TripActions, right? You can even decide which sales team you want to keep the budget on and which one you want to freeze travel or not freeze travel, right? So that's something that can be done super quickly, super fast without third-party help. You don't need to bring in a consultant to reconfigure the platform. And that's something that, again, I think is very useful in an environment of uncertainty, right? It's being able to execute that change globally.
Okay, we have another question from Cassie. Didn't provide the company, but let's ask the question. Thinking about growth through offering new products, so becoming an all-encompassing platform versus entering new markets, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I will distinguish between geographic markets and new products, right? So I think for me, what's very important when we look at our services offering, right, is you've got our business traveler or frequent traveler in the middle, right? And what can your sales team naturally sell or position to that business traveler without too much effort, right? If you have to re-enable, retrain the sales team completely, the effort required to do that, can be very significant, right? So you want to have a story that's very natural so that a sales rep or the sales team can explain it very naturally to prospects and existing customers. So if we look at, for example, at travel for us, right, and new products, right? So we've started with business travel, we expanded into corporate cards, right? Then we expanded into expense management. These are all very natural extensions, right? Because you look at a business traveler has to book their trip. They have to get support during their trip. They have to pay for their hotels or their meals, and then they have to do expense reporting, right? So these are the services that we added, and then we added VIP services for the C-suites of the enterprise customers. Again, very natural extension. Then we added leisure travel for the for the employees of our customers, right? That's reserved only for the employees of our customers. So again, very natural extension, relative to the traveler. So when we look at new product extensions or new product areas, we look at things that are very natural in terms of expansion that a sales team or your go-to-market channel can easily explain and expand into without a heroic effort in terms of re-enablement, right? Because if you have to create a brand new sales channel, that has a lot of costs associated to it, right? So, and you're going to lose a lot of the synergies and a lot of the value creation. And then we look at geo markets perhaps differently in terms of different than product areas, so new product markets. There, it's more in terms of being ready to address specific needs of a new geo, of a new country, for example. And there, it's more bandwidth related. It's more it's prioritized in terms of market size and market potential, or country size and country potential. But those are the two dimensions that we look at.
Got it. All right. Another question here from our dear friend, and by the way, a co-author of mine in quite a few of the thought pieces that we put together, Chief Futurist Roxanne Gugin. And she's asking as follows: how is our increasingly remote workforce showing up in travel strategies?
Yeah, no, so obviously one of the things that we saw with the global pandemic is that employees left city centers, right? And have gone more to rural areas, right? So one of the things that we see, again, from a travel perspective, is that before, for example, your engineer that was based at HQ that never traveled before, that's decided to move from San Francisco to, making this up, to Montana, because it's cheaper to live in Montana. It's a different quality of life, right? Now that engineer that never traveled before perhaps now has to travel back to HQ every 2 months, right, to do an offsite or to do a check-in with his team. So that's a brand new use case that before, most companies were never confronted with before. And there, I think it's, for us, it's being able to provide the tools that allows a company to understand where their employee population is, and then give them the means, right, to, for example, if you're organizing an offsite of like 25 employees or less, or a team of 25 or less, to have a tool that automatically sort of creates and gives you a budget in terms of, hey, this is the hotel cost, these are the trips and the flights, in order for you to simply organize that offsite, and then automatically books, the flights and the hotels if needed. So we've adapted sort of to that remote work by creating new products such as this team travel solution that I was describing, in order to capture those brand new use cases. And again, I think we're one of the few that can do that, because it goes back to owning the full technology stack, right? Owning the travel agency, the booking tool, the connectivity layer to, to the supply. We can do that, right? Because we own the full stack, right? And I think it's hard to find at different companies or competing solutions.
Yeah. There is also something to be said about, and I think Ariel said it once, and it really resonated with me. And he said it during COVID, and we're talking about work from home, and everybody were talking about, okay, the future is going to be us sitting at home with our spouses and kids running around and conducting business efficiently. And he said, work from home will end the moment the competitor will meet somebody face to face and sell their product while you're trying to do it through Zoom. And obviously, as we can see, it was spot on. So there are the new use cases of, okay, remote employees traveling to company gatherings, et cetera, to maintain a certain culture. But also what we're seeing in an increased fashion is companies deploying their sales team to go and sell at an environment that is increasingly more difficult to sell. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing record-breaking numbers in terms of traveling trends amongst our customers. And we're about to conclude. I would just say the following: if anyone wants to reach out to TripActions and to Thomas, please reach out to Lian. Lian at Group11.vc. Lian also orchestrated this beautiful webinar series, so thank you for all your hard work. Thanks, Ruthie, and thanks, Jacob. Thanks, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you on episode number 2 with Inat Gez, the formidable founder of Papaya Global, who is taking stage on November 22nd. Thank you again. We'll see you soon.